Hello, good morning, welcome back. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. We're going to take another look at the papers now, and here with me reviewing them this morning are the senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, Christian Calgie, and Zoe Grunewald, who's a political correspondent at The Independent. So welcome back to both of you. There's so much around today to get our teeth into. Christian, you're going to kick us off this hour with a story on the front page of the Sunday Times about parents' attitudes to their children's schooling. So this is a survey. What does it tell us?
So there's some quite shocking new statistics out this morning. 28% of parents believe the pandemic showed it was not essential for children to attend school every day. The proportion of pupils who are missing at least 1 in 10 lessons has doubled since before the pandemic, from 10.9% to 22.3%. And a record almost 400,000 fines were handed out to parents last year as a result of unauthorised absences. And this is all ahead of a big speech being given by the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, tomorrow, who surprisingly has told the Sunday Times she criticises the culture of lockdown, which is not a criticism that I remember anyone in the Labour Party making throughout the pandemic. And there are other things like parents are using mild anxiety as an excuse for, or rather children, I suppose, are using that as an excuse not to go into school. Now, the Labour solution is that this is all about funding. This is about, we need more mental health clubs, mental health counselling, we need breakfast clubs, and I'd suggest that that's wrong, and that actually the solution here is enforcement, better fines, and also telling parents that the lesson from COVID was not that children don't need schools, frankly that they need a lot more of it, because children are so far behind in their education now. And I think for every parent who thinks a child can afford to be missing school, both in this country and across the world, that they'll be competing for university places with, there are more parents who are doing homeschooling, catch-up, all that stuff. And I think this is going to be a real detriment to social mobility as well. I imagine, although it's not included in this piece, that there's going to be a big difference in attitudes towards school between the working class and middle class, and that is going to be yet another problem for young people that was so damaged by lockdown that's going to be coming down the road. I mean,
these statistics really do show there is a problem here, isn't there? And kids missing school can have a real impact on their outcomes, I guess. So what do you make of what Labour is proposing, and to what extent is it focused in the right area? Because another issue that could be wrapped up in this is parents feeling they can't afford to go on holiday during holiday times, because that's when the prices go up, and might be sneaking a few days unauthorised. We heard about the fines. At other times of the year. Do you think that's part of this?
Yes, I think it probably is. I think there's a number of factors. I think clearly there is, as a result of the pandemic, children having a mental health crisis. I think the amount of isolation and loneliness children felt, being separated from their peers at a key developmental time, social media as well, being locked in your room, scrolling TikTok, none of that is good for your mental health. So I do think that we're seeing more children with anxiety and depressive disorders. But I think also we're in a cost of living crisis, so parents, and since having a year or two of being locked down, want to spend time with their children, they want to go on holiday with them, and I'm sure when we see travel agents and travel companies taking advantage of school holidays to bump up their prices, that's causing parents to think that they can take their children out. I agree with Christian to some extent in that absolutely what the pandemic demonstrated was that it's vitally important that children go into school. It's not just about being able to do your lessons. It's about spending time with your peers, it's about learning how to communicate, learning how to deal with conflict resolution. But I do think there is more to be said than just enforcement. I think schools are already struggling. I think the idea that teachers would then have to write these difficult letters to parents, would have to put parents forward for fines and things. I mean, they just don't have the resources, and it's a very difficult, tense thing for schools to deal with. I don't know if Labour's solution is entirely, is a silver bullet. I think, yes, mental health clubs are a good idea. I think having counsellors in school is really important to deal with that mental health crisis. But this is a really difficult problem. It's years in the making. It's systemic. It's absolutely way deeper than just schools. As I say, social media, mental health support, all of it is holistic, and it needs to be dealt with as such.
Yeah, really big issue, and we're clearly going to hear more about it from Labour and probably get government response as well. In the meantime, though, and Zoe, I know you've just spoken, but this is a story that you've picked out in particular inside The Observer, and this is the focus on those houses that have flooded, and in some cases, once again, they've had repeat problems. So what's being done about it by the government? What's The Observer saying?
So The Observer's talking about people, as you say, who have been affected by these floods, who have not only had problems before, but they will continue to have problems again in the future. And to some extent, this is to do with the fact that the flood mitigation they have in place is not sufficient to deal with the level of flooding we are experiencing. This is something that's only going to get worse, right? We know that there is a climate crisis. We know that flooding is going to get more intense in the UK. The Tories slashed resources for funding for flooding, for victims of flooding back in 2016. Hunt has also reported that 500 of the new 2,000 new flood defences have been dropped, and that the number of properties that would receive better protection from flooding by 2027 has been cut by 40%. Now, he's blaming inflation for this, rising costs that are making these things more difficult for the government to fund. But this is a matter of priorities. People are living in areas that are consistently going to be affected by flooding. They are at their wits' end, because not only are they dealing with it now, they're going to deal with it again. And the government is saying, well, there's just not the money here to deal with it. Well, this is a really important issue. So how about those tax cuts? Why don't we why don't we put that into new flood defences? It really is a matter of priorities for this government, and it's very short-termist.
Yeah. Do you agree with that this needs to be prioritised?
Well, I agree that there are 100 different areas where it would be nice to spend more money to deal with these sort of problems. Flood defences being one of them, and I think Labour have been broadly correct in their diagnosis that one of the problems between the argument of tax or spend is that actually if you grow the economy properly, you'll have a lot more money to deal with these things, and it remains one of the issues that the Conservatives have not grappled with. You can't spend hundreds of millions on flooding, let alone investment in public services, if you're growing at 0.1%. I also think...
But you could make the decision not to cut taxes, as Zoe suggested, and spend. What do you think of that?
Well, politically, tax cuts are something that people will benefit from every month, whereas I suppose the government or strategists would say that floods come once a year, once every couple of years. What's the best thing for the government's poll ratings? But again, this is going to cost so much money, and then you've also got the problem of the general housing crisis, some of which involves building on floodplains. The government's got to grapple with how do you provide housing without having to build in these sort of affected areas.
I've just realised we need an hour's programme for each of the papers. There's so much to talk about, and we are out of time. I'm so sorry. Come back another week, please. Lovely to see you both this morning. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Still to come here on Sky News Breakfast.